Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to our video for Lab Chapter 2, AP1. Today we're talking about major body regions as well as body cavities. So we're starting here. We got a guy. He is standing in anatomical position over here. Of course, that is our frame of reference when we're talking about anatomy and physiology. We're looking at his anterior surface here. And because he is a biped, we know that we could also say we're looking at his ventral surface here. Over here we got his posterior or his dorsal surface. And on these two surfaces of him, we have a lot of labeled body regions. And that's what we're going to go through today. Just kind of really quickly go through these, and we're going to move on to body cavities. So one body region is the orbital region, which of course is going to be in and around the eye. So orbital for eye. That's a pretty standard one. Really easy one is oral. Oral refers to, of course, the mouth. And then we've also got the buccal region. Buccal region refers to the cheek. And moving in an inferior direction, we've got the neck, which is the cervical region in the neck. And then here we've got the chest, the pectoral region. And so medial to the pectoral region is going to be the sternal region. So pectoral is lateral to sternal. Sternal is medial to pectoral. Hopefully you remember those words from last time. Then we got our shoulder region. Our shoulder region is our deltoid region. The word deltoid means shaped like a triangle, and the muscle in your shoulder there kind of looks like an upside down triangle. So deltoid right there. And then right nearby, we've got the armpit region, which is the axillary region. And then if we go along our limb, we've got the arm here. And by the way, in anatomy class, if we're talking about the arm, it is from the shoulder to the elbow. And the arm region is the brachial region. And then if we keep going down that arm, so distal to brachial, in other words, farther along the limb, we've got a region called the antecubital region. Antecubital. Think of that as kind of like the front of your elbow. So think about the point of your elbow, then the front. If you've gotten a blood draw done, it's usually done on that nice vein right there in that antecubital region. If you're getting a blood pressure measurement done, that's where the stethoscope goes. If you're doing somebody's blood pressure, you put your stethoscope on that antecubital region. If you're doing it manually, of course. Anyway, if we jump down, all the way down, we've got our digital region. Digital region, of course, fingers. We will see digital again, as you might be able to guess. So we're kind of done with the arm right there. If we go back to the torso here, we did pectoral, we did sternal. If we go down, we've got our abdominal region. And then right in the center of that abdominal region where the belly button is, we've got our umbilical region. If we go down a little bit farther, just superior to the external genitalia here, we've got the pubic region. And then lateral to the pubic region, we've got the inguinal region, kind of like the groin area. And if we do jump around to the back side, there's some things on the upper body in the back we didn't do. The back of the head is called the occipital region. If we jump down, we've got our lower back, kind of right above the belt line here is our lumbar region. And right below that, kind of like right above the gluteal cleft, is going to be the sacral region. Okay, Let's jump into the lower limb. In the thigh, we've got femoral. Front of the knee, so where the kneecap is, we've got patellar region. Back of the knee is popliteal. And if we jump down, we've got toes here. Toes are digital. And then the bottom of the foot, the sole of the foot, is the plantar region. So now we got to use these regional terms when we're describing parts of the body, where things are, etc. We're going to meet a lot of terms as we go through this semester. So like, for example, there's a deltoid region. Later we'll meet the deltoid muscle, which is obviously in the same place. We'll talk about a muscle called the pectoralis major, which is in the pectoral region. We'll learn about the occipital lobe of the brain, which is going to be towards the back. So we're going to see these guys a lot. We're going to see bones like the femur, which relates to femoral, the patella, which relates to patellar, the sternum, which relates to sternal. We'll see vertebrae like cervical vertebrae in the neck, lumbar vertebrae in the lower back, sacral vertebrae as well. So we're going to meet so many of these words as we continue on in A&P1 and in A&P2. All right, fantastic. We are done with body regions. Let's talk about body cavities. So we have made a nice longitudinal slice on this guy. Definitely not transverse, right? Transverse would be going across. So does this look like a frontal cut to you? No, this guy has not been cut frontally. He has been cut mid-sagittally. And when we do this cut, we can see two major body cavities right off the bat. One of the major body cavities we see is more posterior. It's kind of in the darker gray right here. And that more posterior body cavity is appropriately the dorsal body cavity. Then the lighter gray one, more to the front, more anterior, so that body cavity is the ventral body cavity. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these big cavities, dorsal and ventral, and we're going to subdivide them into smaller parts. So my dorsal body cavity is then subdivided into a portion in my skull called the cranial cavity. It's where my brain is, of course. And then a portion running down within my vertebrae, and that is my vertebral cavity, which is where my spinal cord is going to be. And these two cavities are extraordinarily well protected by the bones around them. So those are my two subdivisions of my dorsal body cavity. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my ventral body cavity, and I want you to notice the ventral body cavity, we got something going right across it. This structure going right across it is a super important muscle. That super important muscle, do you know what it's called? Maybe if I'm starting to spell it over here, you can guess. That super important muscle is called the diaphragm. Using that muscle to breathe in. And the diaphragm is going to separate our ventral body cavity into a superior region, which is known as the thoracic cavity, and an inferior region, which is known as the abdominopelvic cavity. Now, thoracic cavity, of course, nicely protected by the rib cage. It is going to have your heart and your lungs in it. The abdominopelvic cavity, it is further subdivided, not by any, muscular partition or anything, but it has a superior abdominal region where we're going to find your liver, your spleen, your stomach, your pancreas, intestines, kidneys. Then an inferior pelvic region where we'll still find some intestines, but also the urinary bladder and in females, organs like the uterus and the ovaries. So those are my major body cavities and their major subdivisions. Okay, so let's switch our view here. So now I've got a guy who has been cut in a frontal section. Now notice that I can still see my dorsal body cavity. So right up here where I drew a red arrow, that is the cranial part of my dorsal body cavity. And then extending below it, let's put an arrow on that guy too, that is my vertebral part of my dorsal body cavity. So I can still see dorsal body cavity structures, although they're not like labeled here. Okay? All right. Now I can see in its entirety the ventral body cavity. And remember, the ventral body cavity had that partition, that muscular partition, which I'm coloring in purple here. And that right there is, again, that major muscle of respiration, which is known as the diaphragm. Don't forget the silent G in diaphragm. And superior to that diaphragm, we have our thoracic cavity, while inferior to that diaphragm, we've got our abdominal pelvic cavity with the superior abdominal region and the inferior pelvic region. Now, what we're going to notice on this picture is that our thoracic cavity has some further subdivisions. All right, so let me outline one of these cavities here. So right here, I am outlining a cavity that's associated with the lung. So that right there is my right pleural, Pleural, my right pleural cavity. And there is also going to be a left pleural cavity on the other side. So here's the left pleural cavity that I'm also coloring in red. So those are my right and my left pleural cavities. Pleural cavities, they are going to be associated with the lungs. Each of them is associated with the lungs. Now, what I want you to notice is that in between the two pleural cavities, which I've outlined in red, we have this area right here, and we color that area in blue. So in between that area, in between the two pleural cavities, in other words, in between the two lungs, right in the middle here, there is an area called the mediastinum. And that mediastinum is going to have the heart. That mediastinum is going to have the trachea and the esophagus and some other important things as well. Now, our mediastinum, let me clear this all here. Our mediastinum has a superior part, but then also an inferior part. And in the inferior mediastinum, there is a cavity called the pericardial cavity. Like its name sounds, look at that cardial right there, like cardiac. The pericardial cavity is going to be associated with the heart. Okay, so let's backtrack for a second here. We're doing major body cavities. We've got a major body cavity in the back called dorsal, which I see its two subdivisions, cranial, and which is up here, and vertebral, which is right here. And then we've got our anterior cavity, which is the ventral body cavity, diaphragm across the middle, inferior is abdominal pelvic, subdivided into abdominal and pelvic, superior is thoracic. Two big areas on each side are going to denote my pleural cavities, each associated with a lung. The middle of the thoracic cavity is the mediastinum, and the inferior portion of that has a cavity associated with the heart called the pericardial cavity. All right, wow, good job. If we just switch up our picture, I just have a more colorful view here for you to check out and study. Everything I just went over is in here, just in beautiful color. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to meet some membranes and other things that are in these cavities. Okay, so what cavity have we opened here? We've cut open the skull. So did we open dorsal or ventral? Well, if you're thinking dorsal, you are correct. And in particular, what part of the dorsal body cavity have we exposed? Well, we're seeing a brain here, and so we've opened up the cranial cavity. And in both my cranial and my vertebral cavity, I'm going to find membranes, and these membranes are called meninges. And there are actually 3 layers of these membranes called meninges, and these meninges, what they are going to do, they are going to anchor. That says anchor. They're going to protect. And what 2 organs do we have in our dorsal body cavity? We've got the brain, and we've got the spinal cord. So my meninges, it's this trio of membranes in my dorsal body cavity, and they anchor and protect my 2 major dorsal body cavity organs, which are my brain, which is in my cranial cavity, and my spinal cord, which is in my vertebral cavity. If you've ever heard about meningitis, meningitis is an inflammation of these meninges. Later on, when we get into the anatomy of the spinal cord and the brain, we will talk more about them. We'll talk about their individual names and some more details about them as well. So for now, we're just going to know we got these anchoring and protecting membranes in our dorsal body cavity. All right. Cool. There are also membranes in our ventral body cavity. And they're different than the meninges, okay? The ventral body cavity membranes we're going to learn about are known as serous membranes. And so a lot of organs in my ventral body cavity are going to be associated with serous membranes. One such organ is the heart. The heart is going to be associated with serous membranes, as are the lungs, as is the stomach, as are the intestines. So, and this is not a complete list, this is just good enough for us right now, but these organs are all associated with serous membranes. And it's a little bit tricky, but the arrangement of these serous membranes is actually pretty ingenious. So what I've got here, I've got this fist, right? There's an arm right there. I got this fist here, and this fist is kind of like punching into a balloon. Let's imagine it is a water balloon. Okay, so imagine there's water in this balloon. So this fist is punching into this balloon. And notice that I've got a layer of the balloon right here, then another layer of the balloon right here, and then the water-filled space in between and surrounding that fist. All right? And this is the way these serous membranes are going to envelop these organs. So if you imagine the fist was the heart, there's going to be a serous membrane, a fluid-filled space, and then another serous membrane. And we are going to name these things as well. So imagine the fist is the heart or the lung or an intestine. Then there is a serous membrane. And this first serous membrane, which is like directly touching the fist here, directly touching the organ, This is called a visceral serosa. Serosa just means serous membrane. So this is a visceral serosa. So it's like the inner membrane here. And then the outer membrane is known as the parietal serosa. Think about parietal as meaning outer, visceral meaning inner. So we got two membranes surrounding our organ. Remember, this organ could be the heart. Let's change color there. This organ could be the heart. It could be the lungs. It could be the intestines, stomach, whatever, okay? So the organ is surrounded by two serous membranes. Visceral serosa is the inner one, parietal serosa is the outer one, analogous to a fist punching a balloon. Now, the space in the balloon, that space in there, is known as the serous cavity. And that space is going to be filled with serous fluid. Now, why do we have a fluid-filled cavity here? We have a fluid-filled cavity here for an important job, and that job is lubrication. So think about the heart. The heart is going to fill up with blood during every heartbeat. It's going to fill up, it's going to contract, right? The lungs fill up with air. They inflate, they deflate. The stomach and intestines expand as food goes through them. So there is a degree of movement for those organs. With movement comes a problem, and that problem is friction. And how do we ameliorate that problem? Well, we lubricate. And so that's the whole point of this situation here. We have this double membrane with fluid in between, this fist punching a balloon situation, in order to provide the necessary lubrication. And there's some anchoring going on here, don't get me wrong. There's still some of that and some anchor protection too. But this, double membrane with fluid inside really is about the lubrication and the friction. All right, fantastic. So this is our basic setup here. So remember, organ punching into the balloon, two layers of balloon around the organ, inner one, visceral serosa, outer one, parietal serosa. Balloon's cavity is the serous cavity, and in there is this lubricating fluid called serous fluid. Okay, here's the thing though. I mentioned the heart, the lungs, the intestines. If I just use the word serous, do you know if I'm talking about the heart or the lungs or the stomach? You don't. So we're going to have to replace the word serous with some specific words for specific organs. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, of course, this is the heart here. So the heart is sitting in the mediastinum, which is that middle chunk of the thoracic cavity. And what you'll notice is on this heart here, they've put two lines around it. These two lines represent the two serous membranes. And then there's a little space in between. That's the serous cavity. So I got an outer serous membrane, an inner serous membrane, serous cavity, and there would be serous fluid inside there. So there is a red arrow on the outer serous membrane. We just learned a moment ago another word for outer in this case is parietal. So this red arrow is on the parietal serous membrane. But because we're talking about the heart, we call it the parietal pericardium. So pericardium is basically meaning serous membrane for the heart. Okay, if I just said parietal serous membrane or parietal serosa, you wouldn't know what organ I was talking about. But by saying parietal pericardium, we know we're talking about the heart. Now the inner membrane, black arrows on the inner membrane, well, that's our visceral serosa or visceral serous membrane. And that, in the case of the heart, is known as the visceral pericardium. So I've got a parietal pericardium on the outside, a visceral pericardium on the inside. My double layer surrounding my heart. Now notice, of course, there is a space between them, a little yellow line in that space. And that space is the serous cavity we talked about last time. But now we're calling it the pericardial cavity to be specific to the heart. And of course, that cavity is going to have fluid in it, serous fluid, but we call that fluid pericardial fluid, and is providing the necessary lubrication to reduce the friction that would be experienced as the heart fills up with blood, as it relaxes, and as it gets a little smaller as it contracts. All right, excellent, excellent. Let's switch gears from the heart here to the lung. Switching gears to the lungs here. So I got a pair of lungs here. I've also got the thoracic wall. Think about like rib cage, muscles, connective tissue, skin, all that. I got a muscle below my heart here. Can anybody tell me what that muscle is? That, of course, is starts with a D. It is the diaphragm. Mediastinum is in between the lungs. The heart with its pericardial cavity would be right here. Now, on my lung, so on this left lung here, notice we have got an inner membrane on the lung. I'm going to put a black arrow on that line right there. That inner lung membrane is going to be the visceral serosa, which in the case of the lung is called the visceral pleura. And each lung has its own visceral pleura. They're not sharing. Each lung has its own. And the outer membrane around the lung, sort of like tucked in right next to the rib cage, that outer membrane is called the parietal pleura. If you go buy a rack of ribs from the grocery store and you flip it over, so you're looking at like the concave side of the rack of ribs, you can usually see this parietal pleura against the rib cage there. So parietal and visceral pleura, that double membrane. And of course, there is going to be what in between them? There is going to be a space in between them, and that space is the serous cavity. But in this case, it is called a pleural cavity. And that pleural cavity is filled with that lubricative fluid, which is pleural fluid. All right. We can kind of get the idea here. Look at the thoracic wall. Look at the lung. Look at the space between them. And there's that heart tucked in that inferior mediastinum right there. All right. Very cool. Very neat. Let's keep on going. So we're going to now shift to the abdomen. And this is an abdomen that has been cut how? Can anyone figure out what kind of cut this is? All right, if you said transverse, then bravo. I am happy for you that you got that. Good work. If not, it's okay. So this is a transverse cut through the abdominal cavity. And they've kind of like removed a bunch of organs, because you know that abdominal cavity is just like chock full of organs, right? So they removed a bunch of organs. They left an intestine right here. So this right here is an intestine, okay? And of course, notice that this intestine, I'm just going to make this intestine blue. Notice that this intestine has a ring shape to it, right? It's circular here because it was cut transversely as well. All right, this intestine has a double membrane on it, but there's a little more space between the membranes. This blue line is the inner membrane. This blue line here is that visceral one. So that is the visceral serous membrane, which in the case of abdominal organs is called a peritoneum. So on my intestine, on my stomach, that inner serous membrane is known as a visceral peritoneum. I see a bunch of flashcards in your future here. Make a flashcard for everything. Then, the outer membrane, which is against the body wall. Remember back to the lungs, how the outer membrane was against the body wall. The outer membrane, I'm just going to put an arrow on right there. Bum, bum, bum. That's a kind of ugly arrow. Let's undo that. There we go. Dun, dun. That outer membrane is the parietal peritoneum. Okay, fantastic. So peritoneum is going to be our word that refers to abdominal organs like intestine and stomach, whereas pleural referred to lungs, pericardial referred to heart. Now notice there is a big space right in here. There's a space here. And of course, some of this space will be occupied by other organs. It's not actually like this ginormous. But this space here is the peritoneal cavity, which of course is occupied by peritoneal fluid. Okay. Fantastic. Fantastic. Let me go back for a second. We got to deal with this word mesentery here, but I want to go back for just a momento, so bear with me here. Check out this heart. I kind of like the heart one, or even better yet, check out the balloon. If I'm looking at the balloon, there's my visceral membrane, there's my parietal membrane, and notice that they are actually the same thing, right? If I'm traveling on visceral, I eventually end up on parietal. Same deal with the heart. If I'm on visceral and I'm going up here, bum, 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 I end up on parietal. Fantastic. Same thing with the lung, a little harder to see, but it's the same thing. The visceral and the parietal are actually the same membrane, the same balloon, just in two different spots. And it's true also in the abdomen. But the connecting piece between the visceral, so here's the visceral peritoneum, here's the parietal peritoneum just in the back here, the connecting piece is longer. And that connecting piece, that anchoring piece, is longer, and it is known as a mesentery. And the mesentery really does serve as an anchor. So abdominal organs are multiple. They got to be in the right place. And the mesentery helps anchor them. All right. Amazing stuff. I strongly recommend you listen to this, membrane and cavity and fluid stuff multiple times. Listen to it again. Write it. Flashcard it. Draw it. And another view here. This is a sagittal section, but it's off to the side a bit. Do you remember the word for that? This is a parasagittal section here. And in a parasagittal section, I can see a green line on the wall of the abdominal cavity here. And that green line, let's grab a green color, is the outer of the two membranes. Better word for outer is parietal. And that is a parietal peritoneum. And then on the organ itself, either a blue line, like a light blue line for the liver here, light blue line, oh, they're all light blue, easy actually, haha. Light blue line for the liver, light blue line for the stomach, light blue line for the large intestine, light blue line for the small intestine. That light blue guy is my inner serous membrane, which is my visceral peritoneum. Now in this pic, We do have more organs going on, but we can still note that there is a space in here. I got some yellow stars in the space. There is this space in here. That space is the peritoneal cavity. And what is in that space but peritoneal fluid, which is serving that lubrication function. All right, really good stuff. Amazing. Almost done. Video 2 is a little longer than video 1. One of the things we're going to do in lab is build a model with some tape and some paper and a marble or something, lima bean or something like that. We're going to build a model of this system. So look forward to that in actual lab. And with that, folks, we are done lab number 2. If you stay with me the whole time, fantastic. Let me know you watched the whole thing so I can give you some kudos. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.